Please fasten your seatbelts again. I hope you had a good time here at the Cape, although it was a little bit cloudy. But as I said, this is the normal weather up here. And now that you have seen the North Cape, I can tell you a little secret about the peninsula that you're going to see again on your right. Most of you probably already know about this, but the North Cape, it's not the northernmost point of Europe. So, yeah, the northernmost point of Europe is this peninsula on your right, Nifshalotten. And it is a few degrees further north than the North Cape. But there is no road to Nifshalotten, so you would have to walk from here to there 2 hours and a half, and then also back. So maybe next time you come up here, if the weather is nice, you can go for a hike and visit the actual northernmost point of Europe. But at least you have a memory of it, at least you've seen it. You haven't been there, but you've seen it. On your left, there is a bay called Honningsvåg, and this bay is important because nowadays it's not too complicated to reach the North Cape. There is a road, but this road was only completed in 1956, so before that the only way to come up here was by boat, and ships were anchored in this bay, Honningsvåg. And to come up here, there was, and still is actually, a zigzag path where people had to almost climb to reach the top of the cliff. It is very steep. There are 307 meters to the top of the cliff. So imagine climbing it in the 1800s with a corset and a long heavy dress, or maybe a suit. That must have been very complicated. And this is actually why there are stories of young and strong locals who made a very good living by carrying people up these cliffs. They were real Vikings at that time, I think. But could anyone come up here to visit the North Cape? Actually no, because visiting this area was a very expensive trip in the past. So mostly rich people and royalty came visiting, and this happened until the end of the 19th century. For instance, as I mentioned earlier, King Oscar II came visiting, and he brought with him a lot of journalists which wrote in their papers about this place, making it a very famous travel destination. And thanks to this, tourism became another big source of money for the island, apart from fishing, of course. The steamer you're traveling on was founded, and for the first time in history it became possible to just buy a ticket on a ship and travel for a few weeks instead of months and years. So this is when tourism really started. I mentioned earlier, we are in the North Cape community, but we are also in Finnmark, which is the name of this Norwegian region. And it's the northernmost region of Norway, and it's pretty big because it's bigger than Switzerland. But you are not going to find the same population of Switzerland here in Finnmark, because in Switzerland there are more than 8 million people, while here in Finnmark only about 75,000. So this means that the population density of Finnmark is very, very low. There are 1.5 people per square kilometer. This means that there is a lot of space and not so many people. Also, by the way, we are very up north here, but we are also quite east, because this island is located on the same longitude as Warsaw in Poland. And Kirkenes, which is a city not far from here, it's on the same longitude as Istanbul in Turkey. So yeah, we are up north, but we are also quite east. In a few seconds on your right, you're going to see Gjesværstepper once again, this group of islands with the nature reserve. And we cannot see it from here, but in front of those islands on the coast there is a small village called Gjesvær. And Gjesvær centuries ago was a Viking settlement. The Vikings were using this island because they were using this island as a base because they wanted to travel to Russia, and they were going on a combined trading and plunder expedition. So if on the way they met a small settlement, they would plunder it. If they met a large one, they would trade with it. And what caused the Vikings to stay here was the exportation of stockfish. It was a very profitable activity. In fact, this part of Norway was the richest in those years. And this is because the church introduced days of fasting. So there were 140 days a year where people couldn't eat any meat. So fish was the only option. However, fresh fish would spoil really fast. And one could salt the fish to conserve it, but salt was very expensive back then. So stockfish became the best option. And in this period, from the 1200s to the 1600s, this part of Norway produced enormous quantities of stockfish. now that you have seen a little bit of this island, I would like to ask you a question. Would you like to live here? Yes? Oh, that's the first time that I hear yes. Very first time. But the most common answer is no. Or yes, but only in the summer. Because a lot of people think it's very cold up here. But it's actually not as cold as you might think. In fact, the average temperature in the winter here on this island is -4 degrees Celsius, which is 25 degrees Fahrenheit. And as I mentioned earlier, I come from a little town in the north of Italy, and there it's even colder. We have -10 or -12 sometimes. So I should almost stay here during the winter because it's less cold than at home. But if you go in the mainland, like in Tromsø or Oslo, the temperature can reach -20, -30, sometimes even colder. But this doesn't happen here, and this is thanks to the Gulf Stream and also thanks to warm winds and currents from the west. The summer is cool. The average temperature in the summer is 11 degrees Celsius, which is 50 degrees Fahrenheit. But this last summer was particularly hot, with an average temperature of 18 degrees Celsius. And on the 30th of August, there were 30 degrees Celsius at the North Cape, which are 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And now we're driving through a Sami summer camp again. And about these tents that you see on your right, they could be covered with sheepskin, which is very greasy and therefore waterproof. And nowadays synthetic fabrics are used to cover the wood sticks, which can also be found online. And inside there is normally reindeer skin and bonfire for cooking and warming, for warming up. And in a tent of this size could sleep up to 4 people, but there are also larger tents where 7 to 8 people can sleep. Is it possible to go to the North Cape in the winter? Yes, it is. But sometimes it can be a little bit of an adventure. And this is because if there is a snowstorm or it's a very windy day, there will be a snowplow waiting for you at the crossroad that we're going to see in a few seconds. Because people are not allowed to drive freely to the North Cape on these stormy days. Sometimes there are 2 meters of snow along these roads, so it might be very dangerous to drive alone up here. So that's why a snowplow will be waiting at this crossroad, and then all the cars and buses will have to follow it in a line. So it's literally a convoy that goes to the North Cape. But if the weather is extremely bad, the road might be closed, and of course on those days you won't be able to reach the North Cape, or you won't be able to reach Honningsvåg again. And this happened 3 years ago. The bus driver Inglef told me about this story. A group of tourists went up to the North Cape by bus, just like you did today. But on the way, on that winter day, the weather changed very quickly. And once the tourists arrived at the Cape, they were told they couldn't go back to the steamer anymore because it was too dangerous to drive in the storm. So they got stuck up there, and the steamer didn't wait for them to come back. So they got stuck both at the Cape and eventually also in Honningsvåg. That must have been a great adventure. So today we are very lucky, yeah? We are very lucky. problem here in the winters, it's not really the cold, but it's the darkness. And that's why a lot of you probably wouldn't like to leave here, because it's already so dark. It is just 1:30, 1:40, and it looks like it's 6 or 7 in the evening. From the 20th of November until the 20th of January, people here don't really see the sun, and this period is called the polar night. And the sun never rises. In those 2 months, there are 20 to 22 hours of darkness every day, and only about 2 to 4 hours of twilight. And during the twilight, there is a particular blue light in the sky, because the sun comes close to the horizon but doesn't rise, and then it gets very, very dark again. The good thing about it is that if the weather is nice, the sky is clear, and there is enough solar activity, you will be lucky enough to see the northern lights. On your left, you can see the snow fences once again, and a colleague of mine told me that they are actually also a training camp for reindeer. So the reindeer come here, learn how to jump, and when they know how to jump over the fences, they can finally join Santa to fly with them. Amazing. She saw that, so it must be true. I'm not making this up. Yeah. On your right, you can see the road to Gjesve, which is this small village I talked about earlier, which was a Viking settlement, and that you can find just in front of Gjesvestepper, the group of islands. And in the summer, you can also do a bird safari. So if you come back in the summer, I suggest you also do the bird safari, because it must be very beautiful. So in the winter we have the polar night, and in the summer there is the midnight sun. So from mid-May until the end of July, the sun never sets and there is light 24/7. The first sunset this summer was on the 1st of August. So the sun went down and after 15 minutes it came up again. So the first so-called night lasted only about 15 minutes. But as you can see, nights now are getting longer and longer. The sun is already setting. Now it's not even setting because it hasn't risen at all. But yeah, now we are already in the polar night period. In a moment you will see Skipsfjord from above. Beautiful landscape with Skipsfjord. And on the right, besides Skipsfjord, you can also see something that looks like a lake. And this is the reservoir of drinking water for Honningsvåg. If you remember, we saw the dam earlier just in front of it. And on your left you can see the reservoir of drinking water for Magerøya, which is a small village we're going to see in a few seconds. So coming up on your left hand side you can see Magerøya once again, and the buildings down there are this small village called Magerøya. In the past there used to be 250 people living in Magerøya, but nowadays only about 50 people still live there. And this is something that happens a lot here in the north. Many small villages used to be much bigger in the past, and this is because young people tend to go to bigger cities to study at the university or maybe to find a job. And sometimes they come back, but most of the time they don't. So population is quite a big problem up here. Are there any children left in Kamøyver? Yes, there are 5 children living in Kamøyver, but there is no school. There used to be a school, but it was closed. So children have to go to school to Honningsvåg. And the street lights you can see on the left by the hills are very useful in winter for people who want to go skiing, cross-country skiing. As you can see, it's already very dark at this time, so street lamps like those are necessary for those who want to spend an afternoon skiing. And in a moment on your right, you're going to see the third huts again. And as I mentioned earlier, here is where the Sami used to live in the past. But these are just reproductions of third huts. The real last third huts were destroyed and burned down at the end of the Second World War. And why did this happen? Because the German army was ordered to evacuate everyone from the island and to destroy and burn down all the infrastructures they could possibly find. The only building on the island that survived the war was the Church of Honningsvåg. It was built in 1885 and it's the oldest building you can find on this island. After the war, when people started coming back to the island, they all lived inside this church, the Church of Honningsvåg, because it was the only building left. And there was even a bakery inside the church because one of the first people who came back was a baker. On your left you can see Trollholmen once again. Looks like somebody's already living there. In a moment on your left, you're going to see North Cape Copacabana once again. Anyone feeling brave enough to go for a dip in the sea? We can stop the bus and go for it if you want to. There are actually people who come here also in the winter to have an ice bath. Since after the war there were no houses left here, the government made an architectural competition, and the brief was to design prototypes of houses which were warm, cheap, and quick to build, because in the Arctic the period for building outdoors is extremely short. 12 prototypes of houses were chosen, and the entire reconstruction of Finnmark was carried out according to their principles. But these houses were all similar to each other. They look like each other, and they were not exactly individual in character. So people chose extremely colorful paint for the exteriors of their houses to make them look a little bit more original. So that's why up here you can find so colorful and bright and beautiful houses. And on your left, where all these lights are, you can see the airport, Valan. It's a small airport built in 1977. Nowadays there are flights to Tromsø and Kirkenes twice a day. So this airport is just for domestic flights and only for small planes, as the runway is only 800 meters long. In a moment we will be back in Honningsvåg, which is a very quiet town nowadays, but it hasn't always been like that, because between the 1920s and the 1980s, Honningsvåg used to be a very important center for all the fishing boats of Europe. The fishermen would come to Honningsvåg to deliver the catch and get supplies, and then they would relax at the bar, which means that very often fishermen would get pretty drunk. And Honningsvåg had quite a reputation. It was very, very lively. There were fist fights sometimes, or crimes every now and then, and that's why its nickname at the time was Little Chicago. So you can imagine what sort of things used to happen here. Here we are back in Honningsvåg, downtown Honningsvåg. If you're wondering why most houses have these little lights by the windows, I have the answer for that. In the past, when there used to be no public lighting outdoors, it could have been very hard for the fishermen fishing at night to find their way back into the village or to the town. So that's why people started putting these lamps on their homes' window shelves to help the fishermen find their way back home. moment, on your right, you're going to see the drying racks for the stockfish once again. And there are some nets over the racks to protect the fish from birds. And about the little Chicago, there is one day that has become a bit of a legend here in the history of Honningsvåg. And this day was December 25, 1974. And on that day here in Honningsvåg, there were 500 sailors and fishermen, and they were all drunk celebrating Christmas. But the little problem is that there were only 5 policemen in town. And as you can imagine, the thing got a tiny bit out of control. And the policemen didn't know what to do anymore, so they had to call the closest military place and ask for help. Then soldiers came to Honningsvåg and managed to chase all the fishermen and sailors back to their ships. But there is still someone remembering this day. It was almost 50 years ago now, and they still say that it was the best Christmas party ever here in Honningsvåg. And now we have arrived in the harbor. Thank you very much for coming with us today. I would like to thank our bus driver Inglef for driving us safely to the North Cape and back. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask us. Please remember to take all your belongings with you. And I wish you a nice day or nice evening, I would say, and safe travel. Thank you.